Hello, welcome back to Early Modern Philosophy, the Age of Reason, and today we are talking about John Locke. We talked previously about Leibniz, we talked about his theory of monads, about the pre-established harmony of the universe, the principles of Leibniz rationalism, his theodicy, his answer to the question, why does evil exist in the world? And throughout all this, we must keep in mind that Leibniz is the last of the rationalists in our series, beginning with Descartes and then Spinoza and then Leibniz. And now we come to the empiricists, the other camp, the people who think that men are born without knowledge already being in their minds. We are born, as Locke says, as a tabula rasa, an empty table, an empty plate. There is nothing in our minds when we are born, and whatever knowledge we acquire about the world comes from experience. John Locke lived from 1632 to 1704. He was an English philosopher, medical doctor, and politician. Again, you see he was not an academic philosopher, right? This is something we observed already with Descartes, with Spinoza, with Leibniz. None of these people were academic philosophers, because academia at this time was not right for them. They were upsetting philosophy, they were doing new things, and the academic life in the universities, which were probably mostly still stuck in scholastic philosophy, would not have given them enough space to develop their theories. So Locke was a medical doctor, he was a politician. He wrote mostly about epistemology and political philosophy, but also linguistics, economics, and religion. And he's opposed to rationalism, which back then was the dominant school of thought because of Descartes. He was also opposed to absolutism in England as a political regime, and he was a champion for a social contract and the basic idea of democracy, and we will talk later about it. He advocates for liberalism and tolerance in politics and the freedom of the individual to live their lives as they want in society, and then the role of the state is to protect this freedom and to give people the opportunity to live their lives as they want, rather than to subject them and to force them to live as the sovereign wants. Locke studied medicine first and then treated an influential politician, Lord Ashley, when he got a liver infection. And Lord Ashley then took Locke to his home as his personal physician. At one point, when the liver problem became life-threatening, Locke recommended surgery and saved the life of Lord Ashley. And this helped him a lot, because then this Lord Ashley was promoting him and helping him and supporting him and financing him, I guess. And Locke held various political positions later. He was involved in a revolution in 1688, had to relocate to Netherlands for a few years, and most of his works appeared in the decade around 1688. So this was the time where he was most active. He had a great influence on political thought. Both the US and the British Constitution are based on his ideas. He also had a great influence in France via Voltaire. Voltaire admired Locke, and he disseminated Locke's thought in France. And Bertrand Russell, who wrote The History of Western Philosophy, a very important book, writes about Locke. Even where Locke was wrong, his mistakes were useful in practice. Because, like Descartes, he started something new. He started this empiricist movement, or popularized it. And like with Descartes, the influence of Locke is less about the answers that he gave, but much more about the questions that he raised and the ideas that he put forward. And later philosophers, Hume and Kant, took these ideas and they refined them and they used them differently, but Locke started this, and so he keeps being important, even if his ideas were not as worked out as perhaps later philosophers. So Locke has a similar question like Descartes. Like Descartes, also he tries to break away from scholastic philosophy and, the quoting of the authorities of the church or ancient authorities like Aristotle, and he tries to do his own thing. He tries to find out, what can I know about the world? Like Descartes, his problem is, what can we know? How can we obtain that knowledge about the world? Do we know about the world from experience, or do we know because there is some innate knowledge in our minds? What is it possible for us to even know, and how do we acquire the knowledge? And in this way, Locke is the first critical philosopher, and critical here in the sense of Kant means that he tries to critically examine the conditions for knowledge. So instead of just going off and saying, okay, what is the content of our minds, and what do I perceive of the world and so on, he says, let's first look at how we even acquire knowledge and what abilities we have to acquire knowledge, and how are our senses influencing the way we perceive the world. And in this way, he has a critical approach to our methods of acquiring knowledge, and this is what later Kant also does in his Critique of Pure Reason, where he analyzes the ability we have critically to acquire knowledge. So Locke does not only want to know what we know, but he also wants to know how can we know the things that we know. In all this, he always sticks to common sense, even when it is against his own logic. So he's very different from other philosophers like Spinoza and Leibniz, who make these big systems, and then everything is part of the system and everything has to conform to the system. There is, they often try to shoehorn things so that they fit into the system. Spinoza has this identity of nature with God, and we are part of nature, and so this his whole system is influenced by this thing, his determinism, our ability to perceive things or not, our ability to act. Everything falls under the system. Leibniz the same, right? With the monads don't have windows, therefore God must have pre-configured everything, therefore the world must be the best possible world. It all makes logical sense, is reasonably free of contradictions, and this is what these philosophers do. They just stick to their system because their system gives the justification for everything inside the system. Everything supports each other, right, inside the system. But Locke is not like that. Locke's philosophy is a collection of observations and hypotheses, much like modern science, right, where you have an observation here, an observation there, and then you put them together and you try to find out, some rule how this works with these observations. And this is revolutionary for the time, because since Plato, philosophers have been trying to find important truths through the mind alone, right? Plato said that everything we need to know are the forms, and the forms are in some world of their own, and only the mind has access to the forms, and our senses can be deceived. And later Christianity also embraced this idea, right, that the word of God is somewhat transcendent and we don't have access to it. And so this was always the thing, that knowledge is somewhere where it's not accessible to the senses, and the senses are actually bad, the senses are misleading you. And Descartes still had this, and the rationalists had this, but Locke does not. Locke goes fully empirical. He says that all knowledge must be acquired through the senses. And today this seems normal because we are used to science, we are used to experiment and observation, but back then it seemed revolutionary. It's not the mind that has the knowledge, but it is your senses. And back in Locke's time, physics, Galileo, Newton, Copernicus, this was the model of how science should be done. They thought that the whole world can be understood through physics, and philosophy should try to emulate physics, because physics was immensely successful in describing the world, in predicting astronomical events, in describing the orbits of planets and all these things. And philosophy should be like this. It should give insights into how the world works that is as good as the insights we get from physics. So philosophy should just be a physics of the mind, perhaps, or a physics of concepts. And Locke does exactly this. He thinks of the mind as something that works according to laws that are as good, as reliable as the laws of physics. And the units the mind operates on, the ideas, are also independent little things like, molecules or atoms, and they move around according to laws that are like the laws of physics. Okay, so Locke tries in his essay concerning human understanding from 1689 to talk about the same things like Descartes, but without the rationalism. So what are ideas now? For Locke, ideas is the content of our minds, the objects of the understanding, what the mind is applied to, right? And examples of these ideas, whiteness, hardness, sweetness, thinking, motion, man, elephant, army, drunkenness, and others. So this is a quote, right? Ideas are representational, they represent the world, and the mind operates on ideas only. So when I see this bottle, when my mind perceives this bottle, I'm not actually seeing the bottle. My mind operates only on the idea of the bottle. So first the bottle has to trigger an idea in my mind, and from then on, all the processing that happens in my mind regarding the perception and the bottle and, whatever I do with the categorization and so on, these all are ideas that are in my mind. The bottle is not there. The bottle is not in my mind at all, right? And we don't even know what the bottle does. We know that the idea somehow represents an outside thing, but perhaps the outside thing is different from our idea, and this will be what Kant will say later, right? Locke is not there yet, but he realizes that we don't know anything about the reality itself. So Locke says the bottle itself is something I don't know what. The only thing I know is that I have the idea of the bottle. And so when I look at things and I look at my ideas, right, then I notice that sometimes I have simple ideas. The simple idea is one that spontaneously comes into my mind, and it represents one simple fact about the world. So in this case, when I look at the bottle, a simple idea would be blue, right, blueness. Or perhaps even the idea of the shape, the cylinder, or the grayness of this, or the metallic surface up here at this cap, right? These are simple ideas. The bottle itself is not simple, right? Because it's a compound. It is composed of the cylinder here and the cap and the sleeve and, the water inside. So there are lots of elements to this that makes it a composite, right? So simple ideas can come from direct perception of something. I can see the greenness of this nature, the greenness of a leaf or something. Or they can also come from what Locke calls reflection, means ideas that I create based on other ideas that I had in the past, perhaps by remembering them, right? I remember the ice cream of yesterday, so now there is no ice cream. When I remember it, I have an idea of the ice cream, but this idea does not come from seeing an actual ice cream. So it's not a simple idea that comes from the senses. Instead, it's an idea that I get from reflection, from memory. Or I can have ideas from a combination of sensation and reflection. Perhaps I see this bottle, and this bottle reminds me of something. The blueness of the bottle reminds me of the sky in Greece, let's say, where I spent my last holiday. And now suddenly I remember my last holiday in Greece, which is not present, but the bottle reminded me of this. So then I have a combination of sensation and reflection that leads to me having this idea. And complex ideas now are created by the mind from simple ideas, right? They put the simple ideas together, the parts of the bottle, then I have the complex idea of the bottle. So we never see the things themselves. The sensations we have come from the outside, obviously, but we never know if things outside really correspond to our sensations. We cannot make statements about outside things because our mind only processes the ideas that are already in it. And we can not analyze simple ideas, Locke says. So when I see a blue bottle or redness or something, my mind cannot actually analyze blueness or redness. There is nothing to analyze, and this is why we are unable to describe these experiences, right? If you try to describe to someone who has never seen red, let's say, a blind person from birth, you try to describe to them what red looks like, it's impossible to put it in words, right? You cannot describe it because our mind cannot further analyze it. Redness is a simple idea, and it's not compound. We cannot describe its parts. There are no parts to redness. Either you have perceived redness and you know how it feels, or you have not perceived it, and then it's impossible to describe it to you, right? So the mind does not have the power to make or erase these ideas, also Locke says. So you cannot try to forget what red is like and suddenly I pretend that I don't know what it is. This won't work, right? And I also cannot make it up. So if I tell you make up a new color that you have never seen, try to think of a new color that you have never seen. It's impossible, right? Your mind can only operate on the colors that you have already seen. And imagine you really had never seen a particular color, a particular shade of orange or something. Still, you would not be able to make it up. After you see it, then you can say, oh yeah, now I have a new sense of color. Now I can remember it. Now I can talk about it with others who have also seen it. But I cannot just make it up, right? So these ideas are not further analyzable, right? They are simple, they are essential, and we cannot forget them. We can also not just block them out. So as long as your eyes are open, of course you can close your eyes, but as long as they are open and they receive impressions, these things that come from the outside, these sensations, right, are involuntary. You look at something blue and then involuntarily you will have the sensation of blue. You cannot just say, I look at this bottle now, but I don't want to see the blue, right? This doesn't work. And when we talk about ideas that come from sensation and reflection, this is also interesting because sometimes, the reflection component may be a desire. It does not always need to be a memory of some object. It can be a desire. It can be reaction, an emotional reaction to something. I see something I like, and then I have an idea of fondness or whatever, or an idea of repulsion when I see something that I don't like. And this is very similar, actually, like the concept of the Stoics that they had, that our mind always receives these involuntary ideas, receives the impressions from the outside, right, the sensations from the outside, and then it reacts to it. And the Stoics call this assent. And by reacting to it in this mode of assent, we actually agree to this impression that we get, and then we in a way validate it and give it an internal importance, right? And so if we want to control our mind and be Stoic sages, we have to avoid doing this. So we have to, although we have the sensory input, we should block the assent, we should block the processing that lets this idea go into our minds and control the way we act. And so Locke stays very much within this framework of the thought that we have ideas coming in from the outside, and then inside they get processed, and then also they get processed in two ways. On the one hand, we have the simple ideas which we cannot make or destroy, but then we are creating internal ideas, these ideas of reflection, like desires or aversions or whatever it is, or assent, Stoic assent, and these we can create and we can control them. And the Stoics would say we should control them, but this was not Locke's problem at this point. So we can have ideas coming from the outside through one sense, like ideas that come through the eyes, right? Colors and shapes that we see. But we can also have ideas from multiple senses. So I can go to the sea, right? Look at the sea, touch the water, taste the water, see the water, and then I have an idea of the sea water that is supported by multiple senses. But the essential point for Locke, and this is the main point where he disagrees with the rationalist philosophers, is that we don't have any innate idea. So the moment we are born, for Locke, we are born, as he says, a tabula rasa. Rasa means raised, or eraser, right, comes from there in the sense that it has been erased, there's nothing on it. And the tabula is a table, right? It's a table, or a slate is often translated as a slate, a surface that is, even, and raised, removed everything on it. So we have an empty slate as our mind, an empty table. And when we are born, right, there's nothing in it. So if the baby wants to eventually have a mental life like ours, it needs to get sensory input, and these sensations that it will receive will be the building blocks for whatever happens later in the baby's mind. You can think of it a little bit as Lego, right? You cannot build a Lego castle if you don't have Lego stones, the basic stones. The stones don't necessarily resemble the castle, right? The stones are just the building blocks, but the building blocks are really necessary. If you don't have the basic building blocks, you cannot start building anything. And you cannot build the building blocks, you have to buy them, right? Nobody can make Lego. You can perhaps try to engineer something similar, but if you want it to be Lego, you have to go to the shop and get it. What you do from then on is your thing, right? Your mind can create castles, spaceships, whatever it wants out of these Lego bricks, but the bricks have to be bought. So this is a pretty good metaphor, right, for what Locke thinks about ideas. Our complex ideas, our mind can create them, but the basic building blocks have to come in from our senses. We don't have control over them. And this is different from what the rationalists thought, right? Descartes thought that the human mind is capable of innate ideas. We have these innate ideas about logical truths, about the essence of matter. You remember the wax experiment, and if you don't remember, you can go back and watch the other video about Descartes, God, the essence of mind. All these things are innate ideas, perhaps even ideas about geometry, mathematics, truths of mathematics. And Locke would say, no. These ideas all have to come in eventually through the basic blocks for them, at least, have to come in through sensation. And later our mind can create more complex ideas based on them. And Spinoza, if we go and compare him a little with other philosophers, also Spinoza would say now our ideas can be adequate without experience, right? We can have adequate ideas without experience, because we have this internal connection to the world, right? Idea and ideatum are identical, because in his world, of course, we are part of nature. Nature is God, nature is everything. And therefore, as part of nature, we have direct access to the truths of nature. We don't need our senses, right, to go through the senses. Leibniz, even more, right, an enemy of the senses, would say that monads don't have windows, right? That there are not even any senses. Everything what we think we perceive in reality is pre-programmed by God into this perfect world of the monads. And we just think that we are perceiving it from the outside, but it's not true. Locke disagrees with all of them. The mind of the baby is a tabula rasa. Ideas have to come from the outside. Basic ideas have to come from the outside. And when Spinoza says that we already have all the ideas in our minds, then you could in principle criticize, right? You could say, okay, but the baby obviously does not know the truths of geometry. If I take a baby, even perhaps a smaller child that can already speak, and I ask it what's the sum of angles in a triangle, right? The small child will not say 180 degrees, except if it's a prodigy, right, in geometry. Otherwise, they will not have any idea what I'm talking about. So if Spinoza or any rationalist says that this is an innate idea, then they have to explain why the baby does not know about it. And Spinoza said, actually, in this situation, that the baby, of course, does not have the fully formed ideas of geometry, but it has the potential to form these ideas. And this potential is what is built in. But then, of course, Locke is not happy with this, because Locke says, okay, what is this potential? And how can I even understand it? And what does potential even mean, right? Do we all have the potential? What is the potential? And it's like talking about a statue, right? You say, okay, I have a beautiful statue, but before the artist makes the statue, I have just a block of granite, of rock, and this unformed block is what later the statue will be made of. But now I can ask, is the potential to be a statue already in this rock? And this does not seem to be the case, right? In a sense, yes, the statue is inside this rock, but if you give me the rock, I cannot make the statue, right? You need somebody who knows how to make a sculpture in order to get the statue out of the rock. And it's not like the statue is potentially in the rock and just by randomly, shaking the rock a little, you will get the statue. This is not the case. There is an infinity of different statues in the rock, right? And so you need the artist, you need the vision, you need the tools, you need the ability, and then you get the statue. And so the potential, there is some potential in the rock to be a statue, but it's not meaningful potential in the sense that the rock can make the statue without these contributions from the outside, which are the actual thing that makes the statue. It's not the rock that has the potential. It's the artist. And so in the same way, you can argue when you say, the baby has the potential. The baby is like a rock, right? Of course, it has the potential to develop a brain and a mind, but it won't develop the mind by itself as little as the rock will develop to be a statue. If you want these things to happen, you need to add stuff. You need to have an artist, you need to have tools, you have to need talent, and the baby will need to have experiences, sensations from the outside world, learn about geometry and so on, and then it will be able to have the correct ideas. So the potential alone is meaningless, although perhaps it has the potential, but the potential does not make a statue. Now, when we talk about ideas, truths that are not gained from sensory experience, then we have to see what these are. I mean, not even Locke would dispute that there are some ideas that we don't have from sensory experience. For example, the laws of logic, right? To think logically, the law of the excluded, middle and so on, and laws of contradiction and how our mind works in a basic logical sense. Of course, these workings of the mind are already in the mind. It's just the material on which they work that has to come from the outside.